actually the synergetic story of process management and mining. For this, I'm not here by myself. You see on the screen as well, we have invited Caspar Jans, who is one of the leading experts in this field and in the conversation, and also a principal CPM solution specialist over at Celonis, which is, of course, we are a partner for Celonis. So I'll start by introducing myself, then I'll hand over to you, Caspar, and then we can get on to the agenda points. So my name is Lucia Fernandez. I'm a senior process intelligence consultant in Apolix, and I've been here for a year and a half or so. I have experience with process management because I got the opportunity to work together with Caspar and other colleagues from Celonis on really understanding, okay, what is it and how can it bring value? So this is why I'm super happy and excited to share this knowledge with you and to host this webinar for you today. Now over to you, Caspar, as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lucia. And sorry for the poor lighting in my place. I'm in a little cubicle and lighting is never optimal. But anyway, it's very nice to be here and thank you for the invitation. So my name is Caspar Jans. I am indeed active and working for Celonis as a principal BPM expert. I've been in the BPM field for about 20 to 25 years now in various roles and functions in companies. And I'm more than happy to share whatever experience I have in this with everybody else. People that are active on LinkedIn probably ran across either my newsletter or some of the podcast episodes that I'm doing with a friend of mine. And let's take the show on the road, Lucia.
Perfect. Great. Super good to have you, as we said. So for today, what do we want to cover and why is this such an exciting webinar? First and foremost, we want to set the scene. So really, what is not just process management, but what really is process management, process mining, and the combination of both? This then will lead us to talking about what's really this power of combining management and mining. I think from some of us, we're maybe more knowledgeable on the mining side of things. Others maybe have more experience, right, like you, Caspar, on management, but we're really seeing a trend and value and opportunity in the combination of both. So we really want to spend some time today discussing and sharing what really is achievable and what is the power when we have both together, specifically towards business transformation and transformation projects. Last but definitely not least, of course, we've had the opportunity and pleasure of inviting a guest on today's webinar who will be sharing not just from the theory, but actually from the practice, a real success story in the power of combining management and mining. So a super packed and exciting agenda. Ready to get into it. So I'll lead the floor for you, Caspar, to set the scene for us.
Very good. Thank you, Lucia. I'm more than happy to. So if you can put on the next one. Yeah. So what I would like to do is take you through what I always call the big picture around business process management. And one of the reasons why I do that is because still until the day of today, we very often see that companies misunderstand what BPM is all about. And that goes back to, let's say, the late 1990s and the early 2000s, where BPM was almost, I would say, an analogy or synonymous to process modeling. And I think by now, being, let's say, 20 years down the road, we understand that that's not the case. There's much more to it than that. So let me start taking you through this big picture and how BPM helps and why that combination of process management and process mining is relevant. So first and foremost, every organization in the world has a strategy. At least that's what we assume, and that's what we see. And that strategy is very often, if not always, translated into an operating model, meaning how does an organization organize itself to be successful? And in order to organize yourself, there's a couple of different components that you need to organize. So there is your organization structure, there is your system landscape, there is the way that you motivate and incentivize your people. And there's always one of the components of an operating model is either called your processes or it's called your way of working. And for me, those two are the same thing. And that means that from the operating model, you start to look into, okay, so how do we actually work? Or at least how are we supposed to be working together? And that typically translates into a, let's say, repository or a collection of business processes, including hopefully already things like which are the identified risks and controls that we might have in our processes, what kind of roles are we using, which applications are there, and supporting the activities that we have in the processes. And if you really want to go, so this is the defining the what needs to happen in which sequence. If you really want to know how things need to happen, then you dive a level deeper into the work instruction level or standard operating procedures if you want, before you actually get to the most important layer on this picture, which is execution. The proof of the pudding for your strategy will always be in the execution. Now, what does that mean? That means that if you look at the reasons why transformational projects and why strategy implementation projects so often fail, is because this picture from top to bottom, from strategy all the way down to execution, is not completely aligned. And I think the easiest example I can always give is a lot of companies focus, for instance, on operating working capital. How much money do you need to run your business? And that needs to be optimized, or read between the lines, minimized. Everybody knows that operating working capital consists out of accounts payable, accounts receivable, and inventory. And there might be some more things, but those are the three major components. Now, at the moment that you in your strategy define that you need to optimize or minimize your operating working capital, but that is not translated into the incentivization or even in the way of working, for instance, for warehouse managers or supply chain people, and they do not take any action subsequently on optimizing inventory, it's going to be pretty difficult to realize your strategic target. So whatever you do and whatever you decide upon as an organization to be your strategic initiatives and your targets, make sure it is translated all the way down into the work instruction level so you can execute according to that alignment. That is what BPM actually can deliver. And traditionally, as you can see, it was on the process level and the work instruction level, but by now, we call that the extended process management. It also goes upwards and say, well, we can also document and manage your operating model and your strategy, just to make sure that it is completely aligned. Now, that is going top to bottom on the execution side. Now, if we move our attention a little bit to the right-hand side of the slide, where the gray bars is what kind of technology is there to support all this. And first and foremost, I think when you're on the work instruction level, so that's the human interaction level, we talk about task mining, we talk about RPA, so robotic process automation. In other words, replacing human interaction with software. And as useful as it can be, RPA very often is a temporary solution. Task mining, for those who don't know what task mining is, that's where you actually record the human interaction with a system on a much more granular level than you do with process mining. Means that you're going to be capable of doing mouse key clicks and keyboard clicks, record them, and then trying to figure out what did this person do to execute this particular activity as part of this process. If you aggregate one level up and you go to, let's say, only the system supported steps, you get into process mining. We'll get into that later on. If you can combine the two, so you combine the mined result with the documented process, you might go as far as process adherence. Again, we'll come back to that. So there is a lot of technology out there that allows you to be much more, let's say, proficient and much more aligned. But of course, with the great power also comes great responsibility, meaning you have a repository of content to maintain. And to do that, you need to have processes in place. I call them typically the process of process management or the management of change. And that will allow you to make sure that your repository of processes remains up to date. So concluding, if you look at the way that organizations are structured and then the way that they go about doing their execution part, alignment from your strategy down to execution is vital. The technology to help you with that is present and existing. So for me, that is around setting the scene for why it's so important to have an insight into the way things should be executed, which is the process management part or the documented processes, and the way processes are actually executed, which is to be validated via process mining. And by saying that, I'm going to give the word back to Lucia to talk about what does that mean and how could that look like. So Lucia, back to you.
Thank you so much, Caspar, and thank you for setting the scene. Indeed, so we're not just now talking about BPM and process mining, but actually about the combination of both. Because what are we seeing, or what do we see? We usually see that there is a gap or a mismatch between how we've modeled a process in order to, how Caspar was saying, align strategy to operation model to execution. But actually, once we've done that, how is our process actually being executed? And that's where the mining part comes. Now, why is it important to combine both? Why are we talking process management and process mining? I mean, process management has existed for many, many years now. It's a known discipline. There's a lot of different companies that do it and providers of it. And mining is not necessarily anything new either. But when we're really talking about enabling process-centric business transformation and operational excellence, we're really talking about process intelligence. And process intelligence combines the both. Process management, this established framework where we aligned, as we've said, strategy with operations and KPIs, but also mining to really understand not just how we want to model and how we've modeled the process, how it should be run, but actually how is it running and is there any discrepancies? Now, when we're talking about this gap, of course, you might be wondering, what is the impact? Why is it important that these are combined and brought together? Well, when we have a gap between management and mining, we usually often see companies suffering, for example, from reduced productivity. We have employees that maybe do not have the right knowledge or lack the awareness of how processes run in their day-to-day execution and hence do not execute it according to how they should be. This, of course, can also lead to compliance issues. We have audit processes, audit exercises, and if your processes are not compliant in how they're being executed, then of course this can result in fines and penalties. This in itself increases, right, costs of running your processes and running your business. And it could even, in some cases, and for customers, lead to dissatisfaction. So it's super important when we're talking about process intelligence and really striving for operational excellence that we're able to bridge the gap between the two. And this, the power of doing so, is really captured in the following 3 key points. If we're able to combine basically and understand where the gap lies between how we are modeling our process and how we manage our process and how it's being run, we're able, of course, to be more compliant and improve compliance. We can improve how our processes are modeled by knowing how they're executed and govern this with the insights that we embed from process mining. We, of course, can also leverage artificial intelligence and many other technologies in this exercise. Once we have an improvement in compliance, this, of course, at the end also can facilitate process excellence. We are really here talking about a loop of not just improvement and management, but actual excellence. So through this combination, we can first and foremost take all of this real world execution data and embed it into our management, so from mining to management, to really understand how we can improve how we manage our processes, but it can be done the other way around. We can really enrich our mining insights with organizational context. So understand, for example, if we're talking about a transformation process with the data that we have, what would it impact as well, which specific KPIs, risks, departments, groups. So it really also fulfills not just from mining to management, but also, of course, from management to mining. At the end, the goal and what is crucial in this exercise is to empower transformation. We see, and Caspar was saying, that around 70% of business transformations fail, and it is indeed because we have a misalignment between strategy, operating model, and execution, but it's also because of these gaps that we see within or between management and intelligence, or mining in this case. So when we can bridge the gap between the two, we can really empower business transformation. So we can manage our processes, of course, but also improve them. We can centralize all of the knowledge with real life insights, and we can create this closed loop to ensure that we're not just managing our processes or gathering insights from our processes, but that we're actually feeding the both together to be able to then improve them, empower transformation, and then at the end of the day, allow for process excellence. I do also want to give you, Caspar, the chance to add any experience or any thoughts on these three key powers of the combination between management and mining.
Yeah, with pleasure. So here's an interesting thing. So let me take you through one or two examples of how the combination of process mining and process management can actually help organizations very concretely. So imagine, let's talk the compliance part. Every organization that, for instance, is manufacturing, but it applies to many industries, has quite a stack of regulations that they need to comply with. It depends a little bit on which industry you're in, if it's a stack really high or if it's just a normal stack. But there is a big group of regulations that you will always need to comply with. These regulations are supported by processes that you put in place to make sure that you comply with those regulations. So already you can see that the current BPM technology is capable of also documenting those regulations, translating them into business requirements and connecting them to your processes. That's all still on the process management side. Now imagine that those processes that are put in place to make sure that you're compliant to your regulations are also mined. And that means that you can do what they call conformance checking or adherence management. And you can actually say, well, listen, this is the process as it should be executed. And if we do it that way, we actually make sure that we comply to a regulation. With the mining results, you can then see to what extent you're actually compliant to those processes. So imagine that you're going to be audited and you know the scope of the audit. Then via the regulation, which is the scope of the audit, you say that, let's take an example, your ISO 27001 around cybersecurity, you're going to be audited on articles 3 and 4. Then you immediately can know these are the processes that will be in scope of the audit. And if you happen to mine them, you can immediately show the auditor, this is our conformance level. So we're at 92% of the cases we're actually exactly executing our process in line with our documentation. These are the non-conformance issues, and these are the subsequent mitigating actions that we defined. That's pretty much all an auditor wants to know. How much in control are you? And if you're not in control, do you know, A, and B, what have you done to make sure that back to the main process, or you have other mitigating actions to it. So that combination of process mining and process management, so the documentation side of processes, can be a tremendously powerful one. The same applies to your transformation side. Imagine, and you don't need to go very far for this, but S/4HANA transformations are the talk of the town at the moment, I would say. Every organization that I speak to is either preparing for or going through an S/4 transformation, which, if we really hammer it down, it really is a system replacement transformation project. You're currently running on ECC, you need to go to S/4HANA. In and by itself, that doesn't, it's a very impactful transformation, don't get me wrong, but you're staying within the same vendor, you're going over from an older version to a newer version, but that will have consequences potentially. And what you need to manage is the fact that you have 3 sources of information that you need to compare and you need to take a decision on. On the one hand, there is your documented process information, your BPM repository. On the other hand, potentially you have the as-is of your processes through mining. And thirdly, there is the best practice collection that SAP gives you and says, well, here are the processes that we've defined and that seamlessly are supported by our S/4HANA system. And it's up to you, and that's the complexity of your transformation project. It's up to you to figure out which one of these 3 is going to be our future way forward. That you don't have mining, but you only have management. So you have documented processes. Then you need to make a theoretical decision between how are we supposed to execute our processes versus how is SAP suggesting that we do it. But the key part of the information that we're missing is how are we actually doing it right now? Because that might be different from both of the other 2. And the same applies when you do mining, but you don't have a repository. You know the as-is, you know what SAP is suggesting, but for adoption and training purposes and change management purposes, you need to figure out which one am I going to choose and how do I document that one. That's what the process management part does. So always remember that when you're going through a transformation, there will always be at least 2, but potentially 3 sources of information that you need to be able to, let's say, compare and to render judgment on. And that's why process management and mining, that combination, is a very powerful one in every system transformation project, regardless if it's SAP, but that's just the most common one at the moment, I would say. So Lucia, does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense, and I think it showcases indeed the power between combining both. Now, given that we're talking about examples, I think this is the perfect way to move on to the second part of our webinar today, which is inviting a guest speaker so that he can tell us more, not just the theoretical we've been discussing, but actually a real life success story at a customer, in this case, Karl Storz. So welcome, Etienne, to the webinar. Thank you very much for being here. And I'll hand over then the slides to you indeed.
Very excited to be here, Etienne. Thanks.
Thank you also to you. Yeah, let's jump directly into the topic to use the time as efficient and effective as possible, as BPM guys do. Yeah, let me start a little bit differently with this spaceship, as you can see here. Yeah, and consider this spaceship as a company. And the spaceship, of course, is a marvel of its own. It is successful, and it has conquered galaxy after galaxy. It has reached new heights. However, with each new galaxy, the spaceship has to deal with further challenges like regulation, increasing regulation, further innovation, digitalization, further intergalactic supply chains. And so based on this, the crew has taken on every challenge. But with each challenge and each solution they found, more problems arose. It was a one-to-N relationship. And that was the moment where it echoed through the halls. Houston, we have a problem. My name is Etienne. I'm Executive Director of a Global Business Process Management Department at Karl Storz. I have more than 12 years experience in a leadership role at Karl Storz. Endoscope. I am responsible for corporate process consulting services, corporate process management for our corporate process management system, and of course for our corporate process intelligence system. What this means is something I will explain later. We use different technologies, so like process mining as one technology, or in the meantime we call it's more than this, so we call it process intelligence system. We have a business process management suite. We use robotic process automation. And of course, in addition, we have also a platform to manage our enterprise architecture. By the way, I'm the author of the book, Mission Possible, the Process Excellence Enterprise, where we explain why BPM isn't boosting up in many companies. About Karl Storz, we do 2 billion revenue a year. We have more than 15,000 finished products. We have 70 sites in 40 countries. And we have a huge complexity when it comes to our products, because we have a wide range of different products, from mechanical products, software products, electronical products, disposable products, system solutions, OR solutions, and robotic surgery solutions. Let me talk about the topic of process mining and process management, and let me take a different angle on this. So I called the presentation, why do we need to align BPM technologies? And I want to talk a little bit about the why, of course about the what, and a little bit about the how. So let me start with the why. Why do we need in general powerful BPM technologies? But this is quite logical, and I think it's known to every one of you, because as companies with increasing complexity, we need to become smarter, faster, cheaper, and better. Based on increasing complexity, based on increasing regulation, based on increasing competition, more complex supply chains, etc. And of course, when it comes to BPM, most of the companies have very common goals, because with BPM, they want to reduce costs, they want to become more efficient and effective, they want to adhere to regulations, they want to be compliant, and of course, apart from innovative products, they want to create innovative processes and maybe new business models based on new digital opportunities. So, okay, but this means we have to change, or we have to re-engineer, or to transform the organization and or processes. But what do we need to overcome on the road to process improvement and transformation when it comes to processes? So, and quite often we think about, okay, we need to become faster, so we need to streamline the process, we need to simplify the process, we have to reduce waste, and so on and so forth. But what are the things? What are the things we need to consider when it comes to process transformation or improvement? So let's talk a little bit about this. When we want to change processes, we have to have a lot of information to make the right things right. Yeah. So when we want to change processes, there are IT services we need to consider. There are applications and systems we need to consider. And there's hardware. So when we change processes, maybe we have to change hardware, applications, and IT services, or we need to integrate this in a different way. Of course, especially in a globalized world, we have to struggle with risks. So we have to have countermeasures into place and controls. When you change your process, do you have to be aware about your risks, countermeasures, and controls so that they are still efficient and effective after an improvement? What about data, transactions, and reports? Because in processes, you process data or you create data, and you use transactions to process process steps, and you create report to get smart about your process. When you change your process, do you change data? Do you change the way to how to use transactions? Maybe do you change your reports? Unconscious, if you are not aware about this. So what about weak points? Of course, when it comes to process improvement, many weak points are along end-to-end processes. Do you need to be aware about where do you have the weak points, and can you assure that you don't work simultaneously on different weak points across the end-to-end process with correlations to each other? What about requirements and the solution architecture? When you change processes, what about roles? Because people execute processes. They need skills and capabilities. When you change processes, are you aware about who is responsible for what, who is affected by your change? And maybe based on your change, especially when it comes to automation, do you need to enable your roles and responsibilities to be able to execute the process also sufficiently in the future? Then, of course, most of the companies hopefully have a strategy and goals. And do you need to be aware about what are the most important processes and what are the goals, so that you change processes along the goals of the strategy, so that you go in the right direction? Then, of course, when you change processes, do you need to be aware about what are the manual steps in my process? This is, for example, something you can't see with process mining. This is why it's so amazingly important to combine process mining and process management to get the whole picture in the end. Are you aware about what are the activities in my process which are digitalized or only digitized? And of course, what about standards, policies? Because we have to adhere to regulations, to compliance, to quality criteria and controls. So many things. And of course, when you think about this, I'm quite confident some further things go through your mind you need to consider to make also the improvement journey as efficient and as effective as possible. Caspar, that is what you said before. It's not only to make operations processes more effective and efficient. It's very much about to make the improvement journey also efficient and effective. And the question is, of course, is it necessary to have also a process for this too, to make this in a standardized way, so that you have a standardized way that reminds you to take everything in consideration what is necessary based on your requirements. So now let's take a different angle. So we have new, very trendy and sexy BPM technologies: process mining, robotic process automation, process intelligence, business process management tools, and so on and so forth. But what happens when, for example, quality management takes care about process management and process documentation? And operation is aware and identified a new sexy technology like process mining and feels responsible for this. And the next one, for example, IT, is thinking about artificial intelligence, and finance about process automation and RPA, for example. But what happens if we drive BPM technologies that way? What happens with the business if we address them with different terminology, different language, different views, perspectives, visualizations, etc.? So to get confused. And of course, there's a risk compared to the goals I mentioned before. Because then if you drive BPM technologies and process improvement that way, you run in the risk to achieve exactly the opposite. In the end, you do it with goodwill, but in the end, there's a risk to make processes more complicated instead of simplifying those. So imagine a world in which every process-related information is provided from one single source. So, but what do we need to manage processes? Let me talk about this first. As you know, there are different concepts in place. So companies think about enterprise architecture management, business process management, process mining, process intelligence, and process automation. Unfortunately, more or less separately, from different angles and different responsibilities. If you take a first glance in the capabilities you need to apply such concepts sufficiently, then you will recognize there are overlaps. And of course, this is the first sign that you need to combine such technologies. There's a value from each of the concepts, but it's quite hard to drive such concepts sufficiently across organization if they are driven independently from different responsibilities. And of course, then with different platforms which are not integrated to each other. And of course, now I come back to the key for this. And this, I call it the process lifecycle process. Some call it a meta process, but it doesn't matter how we call it. What we need is a defined process, how to drive and how to manage processes. And in such a process, you can also align the concepts and the relevant platforms and technologies. So here, for example, we start in our lifecycle process with a definition of a process. That is what we do from BPM as architects. What is an end-to-end process? It's a good question. End-to-end processes can be different from company to company. This is justified. There is no wrong or no right. There's only a wrong if you have different views and perspective in one company. And this is something you need to be aware of. And this is something you need to do by yourself, depending on the reflection on the business model, goals, etc. As soon as this is done, then with process owners, we define also here in the first step, we define goals. What is a goal? What is the strategy for the process? What do we want to achieve with this process? Then, of course, we model processes, and if the process is in our focus and if it's feasible, then also we connect the process to our process mining technology. But both steps here need to be aligned to each other to take care about the structure and architecture of the process. It would be a nightmare to have different start and end points, a different architecture in your process model compared to your process mining data model in the end. Then with both together, because the good thing is when you model a process, you capture a lot of organizational data. With process mining, you capture a lot of performance data. Wouldn't it be fantastic to combine both? In your process model, you can maintain information about risks, controls, requirements, standards, IT infrastructure, etc. And if you can combine this with your performance data, you have a fantastic holistic picture about your process. You can take everything in consideration on your improvement and transformative journey. Then, of course, you define, based on this transparency, you can derive your requirements, and of course, then you can improve, implement, and with process mining in the end, you can monitor your improvement. Yeah. And of course, in addition, maybe here with an implement, you can also use RPA technologies. Would be fantastic. But I wouldn't apply a RPA technology without having this here done before. Because without this understanding of the process, you will never know if our RPA, for example, is really meaningful, or a real re-engineering would be much better. Yeah, this is maybe from my perspective, it is not 100% to say process management plus process mining, because in the end, business process management, from my perspective, is the umbrella. And with business process management, you define, you analyze, you improve, and you control your process. And within this, you can use different technologies to do this really efficient and effective. And the good things are with RPA, with process mining, process intelligence, with BPM tools, etc. We have fantastic tools. And that's a good driver also for process management. But we shouldn't forget to combine such tools sufficiently. Yeah, with this, I will come to the end of my story. Wouldn't it be fantastic to have such a cockpit as the captain in a spaceship has, where you can control your spaceship really sufficiently and effective to go in the right direction. Apart from this, a summary, because a process is one brick, one important brick, of course, in the whole concept. But you need to connect processes with roles, with the strategy, with your organizational structure, with standards, risks, metrics, technologies, and objects. If you are able to do so, you have a holistic and fantastic picture. And then you have the right precondition for a transformative journey. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much, Etienne. I think that was wonderful. I like to add one thing to it, which I really liked, and I always like to emphasize at the end, where you connect everything to everything else, the roles represent people, and that is something that we very often underestimate or forget or ignore when we talk about business processes and we talk about automation. We don't automate everything. We can't automate everything. We try to automate as much as we can, but in the end, if you want to make this really work, you need to make sure that you engage the people that actually execute those processes. That's the one thing that I really love that as an outcome.
Of course,
thanks.
It's also my perspective. One last sentence about this, because in the end, as a BPM guy, it's in my responsibility to provide methods, tools, structures to make processes transparent, so that the business in the end, because in the end, the business has to understand this to make the right decisions and to bring processes in the right direction. Yeah, so that is also with tools, methods, and structures, you can enable your organization. And in the end, that is the real asset. The most important asset are the people.
Yeah.
And if you can enable the people about the complexity, they will automatically make the right decisions, and then they are able to make the right things right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Etienne, for sharing your perspective and your journey. I now, with the time that we have left on this, I do want to open as well the floor for anybody from our audience that might have any questions on what we've discussed, be it on the scene, on the power of combining both, or on Etienne's presentation and perspective.
Yeah, practically, Lucia, can people just type in the question and we'll see it in the Q&A, or can we unmute them? I think it's just a Q&A, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think people can type in.
Yeah, hi. I think the chat section is disabled.
So there we go. Hi, Akash.
Okay. Yeah, hi, Caspar. How are you?
Very good. Nice that you're here.
Yeah. Okay. I can post questions in Q&A, right?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And then I'll start with the first one so you can type. So the first question I think is from Michael Arias. I'm on the side of academia. How could we collaborate to push our students to access these new approaches? We're part of the Celonis Academy initiative. Great question. I'm supposed to have an answer, but I don't, to be honest, because I'm not part of that academy program. But I'll look into it and I'll come back to you on that, Michael. So no worries. What I typically do is I do guest lectures at universities from time to time, and we know that we have a program where we can actually allow students to access these tools that we have. And so I'll come back to that after probably at the very early next week, because the rest of my week is a little bit booked, to be very honest. So I hope that's fine for you. Okay, thanks, Michael. All right, Akash is still typing, I guess. Any other questions in the audience? And if none, also fine. by the way. That means that we've been extremely clear. And Etienne has been extremely clear, by the way. I really like that.
Yeah.
And otherwise, Akash, if you want to just spell out the question instead of typing it, feel free.
Like I wanted to ask, what role does AI play in enhancing the integration of process mining and process management? And also, what kind of pitfalls do you face when you are like doing the migration?
Okay. I'll take a first crack at it, but I'm also, of course, interested in Lucia's and Etienne's view on that. I think AI can have a facilitating, enabling role. Certainly, if you look at AI from the perspective where you start looking at AI agents, I could envision for the future, despite the things that they can already do now, but I would envision for the future that within your BPM repository, there live a number of AI agents that make sure that they pull information from all the right sources, bring them together, and simply interact with the users to present them the information they're looking for instead of the user having to find it. I'll be brief because, of course, we're running out of time. But Lucia, would you care to share your vision, and then Etienne?
Yeah, I'm happy to share what I've seen from customers I've worked with, and what is noticeable is AI can really facilitate indeed what Caspar was saying, but also we've been talking about the combination of mining and management, right? But a customer can be either more focused on one or the other at different stages of, for example, their management process and journey. So with AI, what can be done is really leverage all the existing knowledge, but also suggest and help companies when we're talking about transformation projects and understanding how to best model and manage their processes. It can really also help them pave the way. So this is the type of use case where I've seen also AI being an enabler for management, mining, and also, of course, at the end, combined excellence and transformations. But excited to hear what you have to say on this, Etienne.
I think that it's a fantastic question, because AI is, from my perspective, the next trendy topic. But my question is always, what is the foundation to drive and to use also AI sufficiently? And of course, when we talk about AI, we need to be quite specific, because there are very different use cases. There are use cases you can apply quite quickly, quite cool. But there are also use cases, quite often when we talk about AI, we have the intention to automate things. And my question is always, how good is your data and how good is your process? If you have messy processes, please avoid to use AI in such a case. Also AI agents, because AI agents will all tell you that your process is messy, but maybe they will also give you the wrong answers based on your messy data. So that is really sometimes a little bit ambivalent here, because on the one hand, I think it's really powerful, but also here you need the right capabilities, and you need to think about your what is the foundation. And I think what we never should forget, I talked about the most important asset, and this is about employees. So HI is a quite good co-pilot, but nevertheless, humans need to go into the processes to learn from process mining. Nevertheless, you need to document processes, etc., etc. And this is also a quite good precondition then to apply AI, because based on a good documentation, based on good and sufficient data models, etc., you can use AI really efficiently. So I think, nevertheless, what I want to say is, don't expect too much from AI as long as your foundation is not given. But of course, AI is a powerful topic. Please got me properly. But this is quite important for me.
Indeed.
Thanks, Etienne. And just one little thing to add on to that, also that there are no other questions, at least in the Q&A. The same applies to automation to a certain extent.
It's
at the
always
moment
the
that you're,
same, right?
yeah, if your process is not optimized, don't automate it. You just simply get bad results quicker and cheaper maybe, but you're not going to get a better result. So the same, I think, applies to AI. Your repository is the gold mine for AI if it's up to date and if it's properly connected.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you for the answer. And there was a
Sure.
second part of the question. Like I asked, like, are there any kind of pitfalls you see, like whenever there is a transition in the processes?
What do you mean with a transition in the process, just to make sure?
Like how to say, like using process mining, like you are enhancing your processes. So during that transition, do you see any kind of like common pitfalls?
Lucia, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I can do that. I'm not sure if it's rather, I mean, you're not transitioning one to the other, right? You are enhancing it. So, of course, the data that you have in mining will then feed into management. And if that data, for example, is not properly, correctly validated or maintained, then that could be a pitfall. But from what I've seen in my experience, I haven't necessarily noticed a specific pitfall in this enhancement. So I'm curious also to see or hear what you, Caspar, have to say on that.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest pitfalls in using process mining in your optimization phase that I've seen and experienced is forgetting to take a look at the context of the results of mining. You need to scope really well within mining to make sure that you're not looking at the results of different uncorrelated locations or organizational units. You need to validate it with people who are actually working in the process to make sure that you're not, let's say, identifying deviations that are actually commonly expected with people, because that also might point into a lack of your process documentation that you can solve. But as long as you don't take the context into consideration, you might take the wrong conclusions from mining. Etienne, anything that you have experienced on that part?
Yes, of course. I think the most important thing from my perspective is do not implement process mining independently from process management. And don't do it only use case driven. What I have seen quite often that process mining was implemented use case driven. So, okay, and then the use case was we want to automate this or this. And then, of course, you see, hey, we have automated this activity and we increase the automation rate from 20 to 70%. But if you don't do this in an end-to-end perspective, you will not recognize that downstream the process, you have created the bottleneck and you slow down the process. So there's no benefit from your automation in the end. And that is something what I have seen quite, this is also the true reason why process mining is so normally so effective and so cool, because you can analyze processes end to end. And of course, the really cool thing is, especially with the Process Explorer, you can see the correlations. Quite often you can analyze that you do something in the beginning, but you will not recognize problems in the beginning, but in the end of the process. For example, you enter order wrongly, and then you have thousands of credit notes or something else in the end of the process. And this is something you can analyze. So end-to-end structures. This is what you need to define. It's also nothing what process mining can do for you, because this depends from your business model. For example, we know there's an order to cash process, but the big question for different companies is, what is the order to cash? If you have different business models or business units, maybe you have also different justified order to cash variations. This is something you need to define by yourself. Otherwise, you have a lot of apples, bananas, and oranges in one data and process model, and you cannot differentiate what is justified, what is correct, what is incorrect, etc. So implementing process mining without process management structures, from my perspective, is a big risk. It's a big risk, yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone, for
pleasure. Thank you for the questions. Yeah, thanks for the questions. Lucia, I think we're running out of time. Yeah, excellent question. Absolutely. I also think we're slowly running out of time. Lucia, would you like to give a concluding thought and close this out for us today?
Of course, yeah. So first and foremost, to highlight again from what we've said, really, it's not just about management in itself or mining independently, but actually the combination of both. And what you, Etienne, said right now really resonates, right? You cannot just attempt to have mining without management, but also in my perspective and what I've seen, management without mining. And it's really through the combination of both where we see that companies become more effective in actually achieving process excellence and process improvement. So I really want to leave the room with that thought. I also want to thank yourself, Caspar and Etienne, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you here and get to hear your experience and expertise. And for the rest of his audience, thank you as well. If you have any questions that come up afterwards, you can, of course, always reach out to each of us individually on LinkedIn.